Welcome, people of planet Earth and all planets beyond. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Josh, and today we're going to talk about how to identify and determine whether or not your Harley Davidson t-shirt is vintage. Let's get into it. So there may not be a more renowned American company than Harley Davidson. They have influence across the world and are generally considered the global icon of the American spirit and freedom and ingenuity and individuality. Yeah, and just being cool. Harley Davidson has not just produced over the last 100 years a bunch of awesome motorcycles, but lots of influence in popular culture. Like with the movie The Wild that depicted biker gangs wearing leather jackets and jeans and boots and just being really cool. This being really cool influenced a number of decades onward, even to today. Whether it's boots or jackets, Harley Davidson has influenced fashion in a big way, and none more relevant right now than their vintage t-shirts. Worn by motorcyclists and celebrities alike, the vintage Harley Davidson t-shirt has never been more popular. So that begs the question, how do you know whether or not your Harley Davidson tee is actually vintage? Well, the first method we're going to look at is the care tag. As I often say, the tag tells the tale of the t-shirt. Let me try that again. Never mind. The care tag is incredibly important. The care tag has actually been a part of t-shirt garments since about the early 1970s. And the most important care tags and the most important company to produce those tags is 3D Emblem. 3D Emblem got a license to produce Harley Davidson t-shirts in the 80s, and they are pretty much on the top of all Harley Davidson designs. Their designs are the most desirable. So here are the two tags that 3D Emblem actually implemented on their Harley Davidson t-shirts. The first one is the older one, which is black with gold lettering. This ran from the early to mid 80s to the early 90s, and the second one, which is a bit more robust, is from the early 90s to about 1994. Now, the original black tag often got worn out, and so the gold lettering would go away, so sometimes it can be hard to tell whether or not it is in fact the 3D Emblem tag from that era. The second one was obviously a bit more robust and did not fade like the original. Now, just because 3D Emblem produced the best, they were not the only company producing Harley Davidson t-shirts. Two others of note, Hollowbeck and RK Stratman, also produced t-shirts for Harley Davidson. Though RK Stratman's the only one I believe that's currently producing t-shirts for Harley Davidson under their parent company VF Imagewear. This t-shirt right here is actually a Hollowbeck, and Hollowbeck has been a company for a long time, a pioneer in iron printing of t-shirts, but here you can find the Hollowbeck logo here on the back. This was the most common way to find Hollowbeck t-shirts that were produced for Harley Davidson. They'll have the Harley Davidson clothes on the front and Hollowbeck or RK Stratman on the back. This was not typically done with 3D Emblem. This one is from 1994, right around the time 3D Emblem was not producing as many Harley Davidson tees. But definitely look for the Harley Davidson tag with Hollowbeck or RK Stratman on the back. Late 90s and early 2000s and into modern day Harley tees often will have the base Harley tag and then an additional tag that indicates the sizing and composition. Oftentimes a gray or white color as opposed to the black Harley Davidson tag. So the next method we're going to use is the stitching. This is a common method to use when trying to determine whether or not any t-shirt is vintage. There are two styles, distinct styles of stitching used on t-shirts, and one of them is called single stitch and the other one is called double stitch. And the difference is in the late 90s, the industry transitioned away from having one single stitch at the hem of the sleeve and of the bottom of the shirt to having a double stitch. If you look at the t-shirt you're wearing right now, if you've bought it anytime recently, it likely has a double stitch. T-shirts produced prior to the late 90s had a single stitch in the sleeve and in the bottom hem. This is a pretty easy indicator whether or not your t-shirt is vintage or not. Now, there are double stitch t-shirts that do qualify as technically vintage, so you can't write it off completely, though it's typical that double stitch indicates not vintage t-shirts. Now, if you haven't determined whether or not your Harley tee is vintage or not, this next method might be the most helpful, and that is the copyright date. Most of these Harley tees were produced for specific dealerships or shops that were licensed Harley dealers or mechanics. And what they would do is they would get the license to produce Harley t-shirts for their individual locations or their individual events. And this led to a myriad of amazing different designs that were all over the place. But those designs needed to be copyrighted because an artist produced them and somebody held the license to them. So the license for that artwork will be somewhere on the garment. Here on this one, you can actually see down here it says 1994 Hollowbeck Incorporated. That is who hold the license for this t-shirt. Now, this gives us a pretty clear idea that this is from 1994. Now, of course, this t-shirt literally says on the back here, Daytona Beach, Florida, tells us where it happened, and it says 1994 Bike Week. So that gives us a lot of information. That might be suitable just to give you an idea of your t-shirt, but if that isn't on the present, you can actually look at that copyright. Now, a caveat to the copyright use of dating, and that's because sometimes the copyrights were pulled much earlier than the t-shirt was actually produced. Most of the time with anything from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, those are all going to be within a couple of years of the copyright being pulled and used for the t-shirt. Some of the earlier copyrights from earlier on, like the 60s and 70s on most t-shirts, may actually be art from that era, and that copyright was still valid or whatever, and was able to be used on a later t-shirt. But generally speaking, the copyright date attached to somewhere around the garment of your Harley Davidson tee should give you a pretty good indicator as to whether or not your t-shirt is in fact vintage. There are a lot of amazing Harley Davidson t-shirts out there. The individuality of all these different t-shirts from different dealers or mechanics or different events adds such an amazing adventure in finding them, wearing them, and collecting them. Identifying them can sometimes be a little tricky if they're very worn, but I think with using all of these methods in combination will help you achieve the idea of where your Harley Davidson tee fits along the timeline. So I hope that was helpful in your journey to discover the age of your vintage garments. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you like content like this. We put out a lot of content like this, and we're ever increasing the number of brands that we do videos on. So hit the notification bell if you want to be reminded when we do. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you later. Peace.